In the 1850s, there was a time of industrialization in the Western countries like Britain, but meanwhile, non-industrialized countries were being affected too. During the Industrial Revolution, non-industrialized areas of the world, like Cuba and Brazil, provided raw materials and imports, and thus became tied to the world economy. Meanwhile, Japan had their own revolution, joining the world powers. Africa became colonized and then became industrialized.
As a result of the Industrial Revolution, non-industrialized countries in the Americas like Cuba and Brazil were able to join the global economy by supplying Cuban sugar and cigars and Brazilian coffee and rubber as grown on rubber plantations. As the 1800s progressed, small factories scattered throughout all of Cuba were absorbed into larger Havana operations, though outlying factories were frequently kept open to handle spikes in demand. This led to increased alienation of workers and moves toward unionization. Unionization was only one of many reasons encouraging experienced cigar makers to take their cigar brand and start a factory in New York, New Orleans, Florida, or California. Cuba's sugarcane industry boomed during this time, requiring many black slaves to meet the high demands of the crop in industrialized countries.
Black slaves were not only needed in Cuba, but when British ships attacked Brazilian ships in a Brazilian harbor, the coffee industry became dependent on the black slaves' workforce. A little background on Brazilian coffee is coffee was introduced in Brazil by Francisco de Melo Palheta in 1727. Brazil was, and still is, the world's largest coffee industry. Brazil was also an exporter of rubber. Central Americans were the first to discover the uses for the unique properties of natural rubber. The process of rubber making is when a white liquid called latex is extracted from the stem of a rubber tree, and when it is exposed to the air for 12 to 24 hours, its pH falls to 5, and it spontaneously conjugates to form polymer rubber. Rubber was vastly imported by the United States and the UK for latex and rubber goods. And more recently, rubber's been used to make rubber ducks.
Before the Industrial Revolution, Japan had closed its doors to trade with Europeans, but when American Matthew Perry and his squadron of 4 ships landed in Japan, they convinced the Japanese government to open 2 trade ports in Nagasaki with America, as well as an American consul to take residence in Japan. Sakachi Toyota was an inventor who invented numerous weaving devices and founded the company Toyota. This exposure to Western culture introduced Japan to the Industrial Revolution and sparked its interest in innovation. Japan's main export is rice, which is traded to many countries including Europe, America, and Korea.
Africa was majorly affected by the Industrial Revolution. European industrialists began to colonize in African countries as a way to secure their sources of raw materials. Later, Europeans began to produce a surplus of goods, leading them to look to other countries as a way to profit from their products. Colonization was then used as a means to provide a market to the Africans, where the Africans were able to purchase goods from the Europeans. As a result, Europeans colonized numerous areas of Africa by the late 1800s. In addition, as the cotton market grew, the need for slaves to perform manual labor increased. However, the slave trade never became a major factor in the Industrial Revolution. Africa became subject to the building of railroads, which were used for trade with the Europeans. Previously used transportation systems such as the Niger River lessened in importance. Areas near railroad stations grew in populations and became urbanized areas.
I hope you didn't fall asleep, but rather learned from our presentation on the effects of the Industrial Revolution on non-industrialized countries. Thank you for watching.
Say you want a revolution.